Okay, this video is paintings of the ancient Greeks, and I recently saw some Greek friends of mine, and I always love seeing them. They're very nice. They're very good to me, and just made me think about updating my ancient Greeks video. I got a whole bunch of nice paintings of the ancient Greeks, and I had them in several different collections. I just got them organized. So here, of course, is the classic painting of the allegory of Plato's cave, whereby most people are sitting in the cave, and the storytellers, so to speak, are casting shadows upon the wall to deceive them and trick them and keep them in slavery, and they're fettered, versus climbing out of the cave to see by the light of the true sun and to see truth. So this is real truth up here from the light of the sun. This is manufactured, fake truth, manufactured consent, if you will. And so Socrates was one that led us out of the cave, as was Aristotle. Okay. So anyways, it's probably the best allegory ever in philosophy, is Plato's cave. Okay, and this is just showing the story of Deucalion, who holds his wife aloft after the flood. And the relevance is that the flood story isn't just something in the Bible. It's something common to multiple early cultures, suggesting that it was, a real event, that it's in all these different cultures. Here's Sadak in search of the waters of forgetting. And this painting also, it reminds me of Prometheus climbing up Mount Olympus so he could steal the fire from Zeus and give it to the people. Okay, now here is Zeus with his thunderbolt, and that reminds me of like Big Pharma, Big Food, and there's the symbols of Zeus as well as eagle. And here is Prometheus, plant man Prometheus. He had climbed up Mount Olympus, stole the fire, and rushed down to give it to mankind. Oh, they also named some of the major moons of Jupiter. And then Juno was the satellite going around looking for Jupiter, when Jupiter's always fooling around having love affairs. Okay, here is Prometheus punished by Zeus, chained to a rock, and then every day his liver is eaten by the eagle, the symbol of Zeus. And luckily the liver can regenerate. And it also symbolizes that when somebody goes forth to help the people, so to speak, they get punished by the ruler. And there's many examples of that. The example of Socrates, the example of Jesus Christo, and many others. Semmelweis, it goes on and on. When somebody tries to help the public, the ruler kicks their butt. Okay, Hercules saves Prometheus, this painting by Carl Bloch from 1864. Nice painting. He shoots the eagle with an arrow. Here is the Oracle, like the Oracle of Delphi. It's by George Robertson, the British painter. So there's a place where they thought they could predict the future. Here's a great Birth of Venus painting by Botticelli. Botticelli is one of the two greatest painters of the 1400s. Magnificent, okay? Here's also by Botticelli, Primavera, spring. It's just beautiful. There's Mercury over there, and it's just great. And the Renaissance was some of a callback to the ancient Greeks, but it was also, the Renaissance Italy was very, very Christian. And Christianity comes in large measure out of the ancient Greeks. Okay, yeah, of course, Jesus Christo and his relationship to the Old Testament, but there's also a tremendous amount of it that comes out of the ancient Greeks. Nietzsche had described Christianity as Platonism for the masses, and there's sort of two major categories of Christianity. There's actually more than that, but there's two major ones that Plato led to Augustine, and that Augustinian branch, Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk, into Protestantism. And then Aristotle leading into Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, leading into the Renaissance as more of a Catholic version of Christianity. And here's the story of Antigone. Antigone was a sister of Polynices and Aeneas, and they had died fighting over Thebes, and King Creon had said that her brother should not be buried, who had rebelled against him. And she basically said, oh no, she's going to bury Polynices, and she disobeyed Creon, and this led to a whole big conflict. And she said to Creon, there are laws of the gods, and they are above your laws. The laws of the heavens and the gods are for all time, not just your time. And so this led to a whole chaos. It's one of the great Greek plays. Oh, this is related to Antigone. Oh, I'm not going to get into that. I don't know how this slide got in there. Okay, here is the ghost of Clytemnestra awakening the Furies. Okay, so she had been slain by her son, who was avenging his father, Orestes. Okay, so I actually should put this together with the whole story of Agamemnon. She killed her husband Agamemnon. So here's her son Orestes, and now the Furies are pursuing him, and this actually led to a court trial, and the whole point of it, this part of it, was that on the Areopagus, they had a trial and he was sort of set free. Minerva was involved, Athena, and having mercy on him. And the idea of it was disputes could be settled by a court rather than by, tit for tat, ongoing family feuds forever like the Hatfields and the McCoys. So that was a sign of real progress in society. Here's Zeus. In the form disguised as a bull with the abduction of Europa, and that led to the name for Europe. Okay, a lot of great French painters there. Jean-Baptiste Pierre. Here's the abduction of Europa. This one by Noel Nicholas Coypel, 1727. Here is Jupiter, or Zeus. Sort of Jupiter is the Roman name. Zeus is the Greek name. And Io. This one by Correggio, 1531, where he's almost like a cloud, like a bear. Okay, here's an old ancient Greek story that Perseus had earlier slain Medusa, the Gorgon, whose face turned people to stone. He was walking backward, and he's using this, and now he shows it to a rival of his, Phineas, while Athena looks on. Okay, so some of these Greek myths are pretty harsh, but there's usually a good lesson learned in them and a good philosophical point about human behavior that's relevant. Okay, here's Perseus and Andromeda. The beautiful princess Andromeda was being sacrificed because her father had angered Poseidon, so Perseus saves her. So anyways, it's a nice, another damsel in distress, the knights errant of the ancient Greek world. Here is Apollo, sort of the god of wisdom and music, and here he is crowned by victory in this painting. And Apollo is one of the Greek gods. Okay, and here is Apollo chasing Daphne, and she didn't want to be with him, and she turned herself into a tree. And here's a famous statue by Bernini. Bernini was sort of the Michelangelo of sculpture of the 1700s. So a rather beautiful statue there. Okay, here's a big controversy that came out of the paintings of Raphael. The great Raphael of the Renaissance painted the Disputa communion sacrament ceremony here, and you got the classic, different levels of beings, with the humans down here and Jesus Christ right here, the angels there up in heaven. And anyways, God intervening between the two levels. But the reason this painting, wasn't this painting, it was this painting over here, Apollo on Mount Parnassus. He's right there with his lyre, his harp, so to speak. And they were kind of at the same level in the Stanza Signatura in the Vatican. And that pissed off a real famous art critic by the name of John Ruskin. And he made this great speech saying that Raphael had put the Greek poets at the same height as Jesus Christ and Christianity, and that was disrespectful. And it led to this group of artists, they're called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, saying they're going to go back to the art before the time of Raphael, that they felt was more sincere, more devout. And they actually became the greatest group of painters in the 1800s, and that was part of the Victorian Renaissance. And then the disciples, if you will, the followers of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, like Leighton and other ones, were fantastic painters. But the whole Ruskin speech, I have it in my other talks, like my talk about John Ruskin. It was a magnificent speech. It's the greatest art critic, art history speech of all time. Okay, St. Augustine, now I kind of talked about him being the continuation of Plato. Oh, and here's just something about Aristotle and his rhetoric. Aristotle, maybe the smartest person who ever lived, sort of, who is it for sure? Is it Aristotle? Is it Isaac Newton? And that's his whole rhetoric, ethos and pathos. I talked about St. Thomas Aquinas being the continuation of Aristotle into the Renaissance. Okay, and I like that form of Christianity better. It's much more, I think, sustainable. The Catholic Church is still around, even though it's corrupted, and even though the recent Pope's a scumbag. it leaves all kinds of beautiful things. Besides all the religious stuff, it's got aesthetic Christianity, which is magnificent. You know, almost all the good art comes from Christianity. There's very little good art produced by non-Christian cultures. It's just a fact. Okay, Erasmus, I don't want to get into the whole political history of Erasmus, but, you know, he was a great scholar too. Here's Demosthenes practicing by oratory by the water. He put pebbles in his mouth to practice, and then tried to practice speaking over the water. He was a guy who had to defend his family's inheritance, and he taught himself to become a great speaker, and he became one of the greatest orators in the history of ancient Greece. The flowering of Greece. You know, Greece was just magnificent. It came out of nowhere. You know, Ayn Rand had said it before, and she's correct. The great highlights of Western civilization, of world civilization, the ancient Greeks, the Renaissance, and then the 1800s. I mean, if you study literature, you study painting, those are magnificent times, magnificent times. The ancient Greeks were just this incredible flowering. Theater, literature, poetry, philosophy. It's just magnificent. Okay, and then the Renaissance sort of brought that and fused that with Christianity. That was also great. And then in the 1800s, you were getting more freedom, less monarchy, more free speech, and that was another magnificent time of great production in literature, painting, art, scholarship. It was magnificent. Okay, here is the Acropolis, you know, the big, a bright city on a hill, and Christianity tries to be that as well. Okay, and it's just magnificent. So there's the goddess Athena, there's the buildings up there, the Areopagus. It's beautiful. And it was, you know, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, said the most interesting historical period of all time was like something like the, you know, about the mid 1400s to the mid 1300s in ancient Greece, where all these magnificent things happened. And, you know, they had such a concentration of geniuses there. So when you have free speech and you allow genius to develop, incredible things can happen. So here's Pericles giving his funeral oration in front of the Acropolis. And this relates, of course, to the book, too. You know, the history of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, written by Thucydides, just magnificent. So there's just this sense of greatness, of meritocracy, of high achievement in the ancient Greeks. It was spectacular. And I think it's because they had all these separate city-states that were in competition with each other, and they had a lot of trade with the other surrounding countries. And they had, because they were kind of hilly, no one ruler could conquer everybody and force them all to conform. And you had a lot more independent thought. And it's remarkable. You know, I love reading all the books about the ancient Greeks, ancient Greek plays, ancient Greek philosophy, etc. And here's Phidias showing off the frieze of the Parthenon with his statues and what. So Phidias was a great sculptor of that day. It's interesting that the main thing that gets preserved is books. Lost Illusions by Charles Glareff, The Sadness of a Man When He Separated from the Joys of His Family. So, you know, men, we're better than women are at, you know, fighting in conflicts, at some things like that. We're physically stronger and stuff, but men kind of like need women more than women need men, in the sense that they make us happy. We're happy when they're around. We're happy when they're in the room. And so if the men are separated from the women, they become sad. Okay, and the women need the men too. You know, they can't defend themselves. I mean, not realistically. Okay, but they go together. They should be helping each other. Okay, what's this? This is from some talk I gave. I said, I went through some of the big heroes and most interesting things about the ancient Greeks. I'm not going to get into all this philosophic and textual stuff. Now's not the time for that. Had a long day at work. I just want to show you the beautiful paintings, give you some sense of this stuff. Because when you learn about the ancient Greeks, you definitely, you know, if you only study a few things, you should study the ancient Greeks to get a sense of what mankind is capable of. Okay, the Parthenon, you know, they made incredible, beautiful buildings for their time. Here is Aeneas carrying his father Anchises out of burning Troy with his wife and his son right there. And this carries with it the message of, you know, you need to transmit the knowledge of our fathers, our forefathers, to the next generation. Otherwise it dies out and the people turn into barbarians, okay? And Aeneas went on, you know, after Troy had burned down, he founded Rome. Oh, and I also talk about, you know, here's another version of the same subject for painting. that's what we need to do with our culture. We need to teach the Western civilization to the younger generation, and we need to teach them other important things too, so they don't turn into a bunch of barbarians. A lot of times a ruler wants them to turn into barbarians and make them into slaves. So I kind of joke that about teaching nutrition. I have to carry on the legacy of Dr. McDougall so it doesn't get lost. It doesn't fade out. Just like he saved the legacy of Nathan Pritikin and of Walter Kempner and of Roy Swank, the neurologist, and of Dennis Burkitt, the fiber man. Okay, and here's a similar painting. This one is The Last Day of Pompeii, but it essentially is the same type of concept. The city is burning, and the young man must carry out the wisdom of the forefathers. Okay, and we can learn a lot by studying other civilizations like the ancient Greeks. And this is another sort of allegory story of Plato, the lost city of Atlantis. Okay, then there's a lot of great Greek stories, and this is the fall of Icarus. He didn't listen to his father. He flew too close to the sun. The wax that had his wings fused together melted, and then he crashed down into the water. And so here's the fall of Icarus, and right there you see his legs. And the gist of this painting is the world goes on. Nobody cares what you do. But, luckily things are a little bit less bleak than that. And here's the nymphs, the maidens have come to the site of the fall of Icarus. Lament for Icarus by Draper's the name of the artist for that one. Okay, here's Ariadne, daughter of King Minos of Crete, and she's giving Theseus, the Athenian future ruler of Athens, a ball of thread so he can find his way out of the labyrinth after fighting the Minotaur. So he does. That's the whole story of Theseus and Ariadne. Well, here's Pandora's box, and this one's a little funny in the sense that the ancient Greeks, just like the Bible, sort of blame stuff on women. Says that she opened up Pandora's box and it let loose all this chaos. Like Eve eating the apple is how that story goes. Oh, and here's Pygmalion and Galatea. So after the sculptor created his beautiful female statue, he fell in love with it, and here she comes to life. And the joke of that is, the idea of the nutrition expert trains a fat lady to lose all the weight. She becomes beautiful, and then she wants nothing to do with them when she's all beautiful. Here's Phryne at the Areopagus, where she was almost in big trouble, and her lawyer realized if he just took off her veil, then the judges would feel sorry for her, and they did, and they acquitted her. Okay, here is the apotheosis of Homer, author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you hold these ancient authors in respect, and the young people learn them. That maintains the culture. They should be studying the ancient Greeks in school. Big time, and they should be studying the ancient Romans. The ancient Greeks teach you, how high man can rise to. They were magnificent. Whereas the ancient Romans teach you a lot about how bad man can behave. I think it was in the book Quo Vadis by Sienkiewicz. He said, from the ancient Greeks, we learned poetry and wisdom and philosophy. He said, from the ancient Romans, we learned power. And then from the Christians, we learned forgiveness and love on a big scale in culture. So here is the judgment of Paris, where he had to choose the most beautiful woman, and he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, and then she granted his wish that he could have the most beautiful woman in the world, which was Helen of Troy. And so Paris, the son of Priam, king of Troy, goes off with Helen, but that was a big no-no because it pissed off all of ancient Greece, and then the ancient Greek city-states joined together to attack Troy. So here is the mother of Achilles. Her name is Thetis, and she's begging Zeus to spare her son's life in the Trojan War, to spare Achilles. Now, Achilles had gotten into a big argument with Agamemnon because Agamemnon took his girlfriend away, so he was pissed off and he wasn't going to fight. But then his friend Patroclus put his armor on and went to fight, and he was slain by Hector, and that pissed off Achilles, and then he decided to join in the battle. And then after he slew Hector, he actually dragged him behind his cart, which is a very sort of brutal, evil thing to do, low-class move. And that's the famous story of the wrath of Achilles. Later, though, Priam, the king of Troy, came to beg Achilles to return the body of his son, Prince Hector. And Achilles, after thinking it over a bit, decided that that was correct, and he did. Later on, there was a stalemate in the Trojan War, and the ancient Greeks figured out a trick. Odysseus, the brilliant Greek, figured out from Ithaca, figured out the Trojan horse idea. It's a common ploy in the modern world. Laocoon, the wise philosopher, said, "No, no, no, do not accept this Trojan horse. You can't trust the Greeks even when they're bearing gifts." And then a snake was sent, presumably by Athena, and it sort of, went after him and his sons there. It's a beautiful statue. By the way, that statue, I think, was made by Michelangelo. Even though Michelangelo sort of claims to have helped found it, I think Michelangelo made it. Look at it, so magnificent. Okay, here's another painting of the Trojan horse. This one by Henry Paul Mote. And here are the Greek soldiers climbing out of the Trojan horse at night, and they're going to then sack the city of Troy. Then Odysseus has to find his way home, and this is the Odyssey, the journey home. And they got into a little bit of a spat with Polyphemus, okay, and he only has one eye, Polyphemus, and that's another big story. And Odysseus had to be quite resourceful. Here he is listening to the sirens, and he tied himself to the mast so he wouldn't be tempted to go off with them. His men rowing the boat, they've got ear protectors on. He wanted to hear the song of the sirens. And here's another version of it. And this one's got him a little more like I think of sirens, beautiful women tempting them. And here is Odysseus when he goes down into the underworld. This is called a catabasis, when a character in a story goes into the underworld, for example, here to speak like with his father and to get ideas about how to, find his way back to Ithaca and his wife Penelope. Here's a painting of the ancient Pythagoras, and Pythagoras was sort of like the first person associated with the vegan diet. It was actually called the Pythagorean diet up until about 1800. And Pythagoras was a genius. He figured out musical octaves and a whole bunch of other stuff. Here's Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans celebrating the sunrise by Fyodor Bronnikov, 1869. This is the story of the sword of Damocles, where one of the underlings of the king said, "Oh, I'd like to be a king." And the king says, "You want to see what it's like? You're always scared all the time that somebody's going to come after you." And then the sword of Damocles is also a metaphor for feeling something is hanging over your head, a potential problem. And a good metaphor for that's like coronary artery disease. If you're a man eating a Western diet, sooner or later you're going to have atherosclerosis problems. On the other hand, you go low-fat vegan and you don't get coronary artery disease. Low-fat vegan with no oils. So that's one of the things that's so great about it. I'm not worried about disease. I'm worried about other things, not diseases though. Gives you peace of mind as far as that's concerned. And here's Diogenes, the homeless Greek philosopher in the streets of Athens. He takes his lamp and he's walking around. They say, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm searching for one honest man." Diogenes was rather funny and clever, humorous. Here's another painting of Diogenes, the poor man's philosopher. And here's Diogenes when he was visited by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great said, "Oh, I enjoy you, Diogenes. Is there anything I can do for you? I'll grant your wish." And Diogenes says, "Yeah, why don't you get out of my sunshine? You're blocking the sun." Okay, here is Plato, and here is Socrates. And after Athens lost to Sparta, the rulers in Athens were not so nice, and they didn't like an outspoken guy like Socrates. And it actually then eventually led to his demise, where he's forced to drink the hemlock. And Plato was real frustrated by that. What kind of a city would, sacrifice its best man, the best citizen in the whole city? But unfortunately, that's all too common with tyrannies. Okay, this is just one joke. Diogenes had heard Plato giving a lecture where somebody asked him, "Plato, what is a man?" And Plato said, trying to be scientific, "A man is a featherless biped." So Diogenes plucked a chicken and said, "Here, behold Plato's idea of a man." Here is the introduction of Aristotle to Alexander the Great when he's a young guy, just an early sort of a preteen. And he educated him a lot, and Alexander loved Greek culture. Aristotle was largely a biologist. He would send animal specimens back to him to sort of classify, early classification of the animals, like before Linnaeus. This is the story of Aristotle and Phyllis. So Phyllis was a girlfriend of Alexander the Great, and the men had complained to Aristotle, the good friend who Alexander the Great looked up to, that Phyllis was a bad influence on Alexander. So they wanted Aristotle to tell Alexander to break up with her, and apparently he did. And then Phyllis found out about it, and she was pissed off, and so she decided to play a trick on Aristotle. I'll show you another drawing of this story. So she told Alexander to hide behind a tree to watch her conversation with Aristotle. Then she told Aristotle to get down on his knees. She flirted with him and said that she was going to spank his bottom, and she did apparently. And the whole point of it was she wanted to embarrass Aristotle in front of Alexander. Sort of what she was saying is, why do you listen to this old fool? He told you to break up with me. You shouldn't do that. I'll show you what a fool he is. And so she basically made a fool out of Aristotle. So the point is that the smartest man who ever lived can even be an easy chump for women. Women are good at making men look like fools because we like them too much. Okay, here is the School of Athens. And this is a painting by Raphael, and it's like one of the high points of the whole Renaissance. It's in the Vatican, and you can see here is Aristotle pointing down, saying, let us be practical and reasonable and look at the things of the earth. And Plato's pointing up to the sky, implying the metaphor of the perfect forms. There is Socrates talking to Alcibiades. Excuse me, sorry about that. And there's a lot of other famous ancient Greek scholars in here in this painting in the background of Roman architecture. It's very beautiful. The School of Athens. Like I said, too, you study Athens, it's just awesome. That was one of the most magnificent time periods you could ever study. Here is St. Paul, and he's giving his speech from 1 Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy or boast, it is not arrogant or rude, it does not insist on its own way. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Okay, this is St. Paul preaching at Athens at the Areopagus, painting by Raphael. And it's pretty important. This is one of the big things that Christianity brought in the world, love, forgiveness. More so, the ancient Greeks were very big on reason, openness, honesty, free speech, lots of great things. The New Testament is written in Greek. Like I said, there's a very strong connection between Christianity and ancient Greeks. So anyways, St. Paul went to Athens to preach. Oh, and this is just a painting. I think I showed it earlier, but Augustine was sort of in continuity with Aristotle's ideas and then the Renaissance. Here's a couple of really good books. The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton. It's a great book, real easy to read, very sort of joyous and upbeat about how beautiful and magnificent the ancient Greeks were and how different they were than the rest of the culture. Almost all the other societies in the ancient world, you'd have some brutal king, dictator, tyrant, and just kicks everybody's butt, forces them all to conform, very little freedom, okay? Here's another really good book. This guy, Rufus Fears, he's the best professor out of all the professors and all the subjects in the Great Courses series. That's also got the website called Wondrium. It's also called the Teaching Company. It has a couple different names, but Rufus Fears is the best. If you get his course on the famous Greeks, it's a magnificent way to learn history of the ancient Greeks. He'll highlight one hero of the ancient Greeks and the events of the time around them. And trust me, if you want to have a real enjoyable, those two are the best. I read tons of stuff about the ancient Greeks. I love the ancient Greeks. Here's another thing. This is Arthur Herman, and this is the best philosophy book ever written. It's called The Cave in the Light. And it contrasts the viewpoints of Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle's better. Aristotle's more free speech. Aristotle's more knowledge, more practical, more reasonable. Plato's a little bit of a mystic. I mean, certainly his dialogues, the Plato's Republic, they're all magnificent. He did a lot of great things, Plato's Cave, etc. But when push comes to shove and you really follow him out, Aristotle's better. Okay, Spring Returns by Frederick Leighton. So Persephone is coming back up from Hades. Her mother is thrilled. Demeter, also called Ceres. And that's partly why she's so happy when her daughter comes back up that she lets the weather get nice again. The sun shines in a big way, the rain comes out, and the crops can grow. Okay, so that is the paintings of the ancient Greeks. I hope you enjoyed that.